Welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Once again, you're watching Newsmaker Live with me, Timothy Poleon, my guest, Acting Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Mr. Leonard Montoute, who is also the Minister for Equity, Social Justice and Empowerment. Should we also come to accept as a new reality climate refugees, having to house people from the neighboring islands who are impacted by storms?
Well, I have to tell you, it was yesterday, I got a call from my Director of Human Services and indicated, which I think was a very great initiative on her part, talking about our Human Services Department organizing to receive children from Dominica. Because, I mean, if you have like, I don't know what the assessment is as yet, but we expect widespread damage. People have no place to live and so on. Now, you know, children are more vulnerable. If we can provide some refuge for children.
But do you separate the children from the parents? How does that
work?
work?
In some cases that may be necessary temporarily, that may be. And, you know, I mean, even when it comes to people who are preparing for exams and so on, I mean, CXC will come despite the hurricane. And you may want to, you know, to make provisions to assist, you know, children who are preparing for exams. Young children, you may have people who need special medical attention and all of that. I mean, it's, I mean, you bring these things up almost as if, you know, these things are things that are unheard of before, but these are stark realities that are facing us now that we may have to consider things like that. I mean,
how soon will the St. Lucia government make a decision on that?
Well, as soon as we get an assessment of the situation in Dominica, because we cannot just respond not knowing what exactly we're responding to. I mean, the emergency people, rescue people have gone in and they're assessing the situation and they're going to provide us with information. We, apart from what we can do ourselves, there is the regional effort that is being coordinated, and I must say Dr. Didicus Jules is doing a very great job of, you know, coordinating that effort and working with CDMA and NEMO in terms of that effort. St. Lucia is being used as a staging site where all those relief efforts will be coordinated from. So we may have relief material and goods coming into St. Lucia to be further shipped to Dominica and so on. And some of the personnel may be based here in St. Lucia, from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Trinidad, from other places, will be based here in St. Lucia. So we may very well find a situation where they may go in during the day and come back to St. Lucia on evenings and so on. From the preliminary assessment, the planes cannot land. I hear the ports are out of commission, and so as many helicopters as possible are needed right now, not only to go in to carry out reconnaissance flights, but to actually bring in supplies as well, you know, because it's a real dire situation from the preliminary reports that we're getting.
But how soon you expect to find out exactly what's happening in Dominica so St. Lucia can make a final decision on whether we should be taking in people from the affected territories?
We're hoping to get a clearer picture by tomorrow, because I mean the French have gone in initially and more people are going in now, so we will be able to get a clearer picture as the emergency people and the relief people go in. The people who are trained in carrying out assessments go in. You know, we will get a better picture hopefully by tomorrow.
But considering our own economic problems, we can't even take care of wholesomely our own problems in terms of providing food to our people and so on, employment opportunities. Where will the resources come from to help those people?
Well, I mean, as bad as it is with us, if there are those who are worse than us, especially our neighbors or brothers and sisters, we have to reach out and lend a helping hand to the extent that we can. We are hoping that we will get assistance from, you know, countries that are more capable. I mean, we cannot do more than we are able to, but we have to do what we can. There's no question about it, because tomorrow they are the ones, today they are the ones in the situation, tomorrow we will be.
Can you think we ever be in a position to prepare for a Category 5 storm?
Well, I think there are things that we can do. I mean, I'm not sure if we can entirely, you know, do all what is necessary to to like obliterate the impact, but I think we can minimize the impact and, you know, fare much better than we would if we didn't prepare, and reduce the consequences of it.
Just this week, the director of CDMA, Mr. Ronald Jackson, was suggesting that islands in the Caribbean should start to work towards protecting their economic assets that are located on the coastlines. And he's referring particularly to our hotels. As the MP for Gros-Islet, most of the island's hotels are located in the northern part of the island and on the coastline there in the north. How can this issue be tackled? Considering those hotels are there, they are established, do you speak to the hotel owners and try to come up with some kind of system whereby they make certain adjustments? Is that possible at all?
I know, Tim, the more we go into the discussion, the more you're bringing up, you know, scary considerations, you know. With the intensity of the hurricanes that we are seeing these days, you have severe surges coming from your shores, just from the sea. And you have waves of, like I heard recently, waves up to 20 feet and so on. I mean, I looked at the beach in Gros-Islet, for instance, and St. Lucia was not impacted directly. And all the sand was washed away from the Gros-Islet beach, and with just stones, rocks, and boulders exposed. I mean, I am confident that it will return, the sun will return, but I'm just saying, you depend on the tourist industry, you advertise lovely beaches and so on. You know, until the beach is replenished, you can't have guests coming in to you know, enjoy the beaches, the lovely beaches and so on that you advertise. So we are at great risk as far as those things are concerned. Even the hotels that are built on near the water's edge are at risk of being flooded out by seawater and so on. I don't know, the time may be approaching when we have to, I remember in the early days we used to have sea walls. We may have to start reconsidering some kinds of, various kinds of sea defenses to, you know, again, minimize the impact of those things. I think the scientific studies have to be done, the trends have to be considered, and again, you will ask me where the resources will come from. We'll have to find the resources to ensure that we do what is necessary so that at the end of the day, we don't find ourselves being so devastated, you know, and ravaged by a hurricane that we cannot recover. I think it would be cheaper for us. Prevention is always cheaper than cure. And so I think the preemptive measures would be more advisable than to allow it to happen and then for us to react.
Governments rely on buoyancy in the economy and growth in the economy for jobs to be created and so on. But if we continue to have those serious hurricanes, don't you think that those gains that we're talking about and we're anticipating can be literally be eroded?
It can be. And that is why we must do all that we can, again, like I said, to minimize the impact of such weather systems. And also, I mean, while we may be in the off-season, we still rely on tourists coming to St. Lucia around now to give our visitors a measure of comfort to know that, okay, there are things that are being done in the event of that eventuality, that unfortunate eventuality that, you know, they can rest assured that they're pretty safe and there are measures in place to take care of them and so on.
Now, do you think that the islands in the Caribbean should meet very soon? I think there's talk of having some kind of conference to look at the impact of the storm on the region. How serious do you think this conference should be, and how soon do you think it should be undertaken with regard to the way forward?
Well, I think it has to be taken seriously. I think the reality has hit home now. I mean, there's no time for talk shop. It's not it's not fantasies we're talking there now. I mean, it's before us, and some countries have been really hit hard. I mean, you talk about Barbuda, Anguilla, the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, even Cuba, Dominica. I mean, many of the Caribbean islands, and you don't hear much about some other islands, but that doesn't mean they were not impacted. And so I think people, and even watching what obtains in other countries, in the US for instance, I think people have a better appreciation now of what the reality is, and I think we'll get more serious responses to.
That will include serious response to debt forgiveness?
Well, I'm hoping that the other countries, the more well-to-do countries, the superpowers, so to speak, will take into consideration our vulnerability.
But why do you think even before the spate of hurricanes, that those international countries and the donor community, they have not found it necessary to listen to us? Do you think it's a case of basically not giving credence to the suggestions that we would be victims to climate change, which is a reality now? Or do you think it's a case where they were in denial and they do not want to part with the financial resources that are necessary to ensure that we adapt and we become more resilient?
I think it's a combination of all what you said, including the fact that we perhaps are not that important to them at this time. I think all of those factors come into play here. But I think the world has to recognize that, all regions, all countries, have to be taken into consideration. I mean, you're talking about donor countries. I'm even looking at some of the world institutions, the World Bank, IMF, those institutions. Quite apart from considering debt forgiveness, we talk about providing us with cheap financing, especially when it comes to rebuilding and rebuilding. I mean, I know they do, but we may have to, further augment what it is that they're already doing. And, even joining the lobby to get the more wealthy countries to make a contribution to assisting us in our redevelopment. And I say so because, to a certain extent, those countries, apart from having exploited some of our wealth in the past, during colonial days, for instance, contribute to some of our perils by their practices. I mean, you talk about global warming. How much warming comes from St. Lucia? You know what I'm saying? We are insignificant as far as our contribution to global warming is concerned, and it is those more wealthy countries that are the guilty parties. And so I think it would be only fair that they play their part in.
But do you think we're not putting up a strong case before the bodies that matter in terms of selling those issues to those organizations and countries which you say are basically largely responsible for global warming?
Well, I think we have to probably reconsider how we sell our message. I think we have a golden opportunity now, given the kind of devastation, the kind of intensity of the systems, and I almost said fortunately, but that's not really the right thing to say. But given the fact that America is also affected as well, I think they would, give more credence to our plea.
Do you think that a storm, considering what we're going through right now, a storm can decide the fate or the future of a government?
Yeah, certainly.
In what way?
Well, I mean, it is testing for any government to deal with such situations and to recover from such situations. You may have a case where people are suffering, they become impatient, they become very demanding, and at times when they are going through their plight, they may not necessarily take all factors into consideration, and they just want their plight to be alleviated. And it may be a crisis for government, especially if they're not getting the requisite assistance and aid to deal with the situation. It can be, yes.
But do you think it's a good time also for bipartisanship?
It is always a good time, particularly, quite rightly as you put it, particularly when you have situations such as these looming disasters or disasters that has struck us.
How are you hoping that the government of Prime Minister Alan Chasney and the opposition can work together in terms of ensuring that we sell the idea to the St. Lucian public, to the masses, that there's need for us to change our ways, to make certain adjustments if, when confronted with, let's say, a hurricane of 160 miles per hour, we are to survive?
Well, I believe that there's no question about it. It's not a question of sides here now. We all agree that there's certain risk factors and there are certain measures that ought to be taken in response to those factors. Attitudinal changes have to be made and so on. I think just as we go out and campaign, and whether people want to or not, they hear us, we put our messages across, perhaps we can join forces and speak from the same platform.
Between now and the, we have 70 odd days left, still before the end of the hurricane season, the official end of the hurricane season. But God spare our lives, and if, for example, we're not impacted by any hurricane between now and November the 30th, or whenever the hurricane season ends, what are you hoping that St. Lucia can achieve between now and the next hurricane season, in God spare our lives, in 2018?
Well, I mean, we have to look at a number of factors, you know. I mean, our economy is based on tourism. I've always said that it is very fickle when it comes to, you know, factors that can determine the outcome of your success on.
I think the Prime Minister will disagree with, especially with that word fickle.
When I say fickle in terms of its resilience and its vulnerability, rather, I mean, crime can affect tourism. Economic situation, not even here but overseas, will affect tourism. Disasters, such as what we are experiencing now, can affect tourism. There are a multiplicity of factors that can affect it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue our tourism industry and continue to do what we have to do, but we have to take that into consideration, and that is why diversifying our economy is so important. But I mean, even agriculture, our primary crop is bananas. I mean, you breathe through hand and a banana tree will fall. We know that. I'm not saying stop planting bananas, but let's also look at other crops that will be resilient and resistant to, you know, such.
When will we stop talking about this and do it as a government, whichever government?
Well, I believe government has to lead the way. Government has to lead the way. And some of the measures that we take has to be probably, you know, altered. For example, we have stimulus of 3 times a year, the equivalent of what the Labour Party calls STEP. Those programs, I think, can go a long way in addressing some of those problems. And if I'm going to provide the resources, I will dictate to an extent what it is that you're going to do. And I think that's only fair. So you can have people coming and assisting you with on your farm if you provide, for example, the crop for them to plant. And I think that in itself will go a long way. Even things like trimming of branches and so on. Instead of merely cutting grass and so on, you can engage people to, because some people are not capable, they don't have the means to do the trimming, and so they would ignore it. At the same time, it can result in devastation, not just to their property, but to that of neighbors, and at the end of the day, they turn to government. So I think it's cheaper for government to, you know, engage people to look at those things. Those who can't do it themselves. Those who can't, we provide assistance. I think a lot of changes have to be made in terms of how we go about doing business in St. Lucia. Planting of trees, as I said, on the river banks, on the slopes, all of those things, practices such as, you know, minimizing the incidence of cutting down of trees. I mean, we cut down mature trees in St. Lucia for no reason. I mean, these are things that we have to look at very closely and consider the consequences. Our habits in terms of garbage disposal, I mentioned earlier, all of those things, we cannot forget it now just because, okay, we have come out of a hurricane season, we were not hit by any severe hurricane, and that we go on business as usual and start talking about it again next year. I mean, I'll need you to remind me of that. Yeah.
Let's take a break. Back in a moment with more of our discussion, and of course I'll be taking your calls, so please stand by to do that. My guest this evening, Acting Prime Minister Mr. Leonard Motu.